Welcome to episode 195 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how's it going today?
I'm all right. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing fine. You're back from your trip, right?
Back from my most recent trip, yes. A little bit jet lagged, but I think I'll make it through this interview today.
That's good. You have a good time in the Netherlands?
I did. It's always fun to go there, and I've worked with several companies in the Netherlands now, and it's always great. And, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, all right, as soon as I get home, pretty much, I'm getting ready to go to Israel.
Yeah, that's soon.
That is quite soon, just a few weeks now.
Right. Okay. Well, at the top of our episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week, we got a tweet from Jagroot Dave, and he's saying, CppCast, regarding your April 5th episode, I can build debug C++ inside a Docker container on a MacBook using Eclipse. Docker support for Eclipse was announced at EclipseCon, and he sent us a link for a presentation made at EclipseCon 2017. And this is in reference to someone asking about, IDE support for debugging in C++
Right.
Docker containers. And I think they said that VS Code seemed to have the best support, but this listener, I guess, is having good experience with Eclipse also.
I first of all, didn't know there was an EclipseCon.
No, I neither.
Second of all, I was out of date enough with my Docker knowledge to not realize that it had Mac support now, which I know it did not from the beginning.
Yeah, it started off just Linux, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I guess there's this Eclipse plugin. If you're using Eclipse and want to debug inside a Docker container, you should check it out. Okay. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the show as well. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes. Joining us today is Victor Zverovich. Victor is a software engineer at Facebook working on the Thrift RPC framework. Before joining Facebook in 2016, he worked for several years on modeling systems for mathematical optimization. He's an active contributor to open source projects, author of the FMT library and the ISO proposal P0645 to add a new formatting facility to C++. Victor, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me.
We will certainly talk about your format library a lot in a few minutes here. But I feel like, I know full well that Facebook has employed lots of great C++ developers for many years, but I'm still somehow just a little bit surprised each time I remember that Facebook has a bunch of C++ developers working for them.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most widely used languages at Facebook. We have a talk by Louis Brandy about curiously recurring bug patterns, and he mentions some numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I know. And there's always Facebook developers at CppCon giving presentations with really interesting stuff.
What exactly is the Thrift RPC framework that you work on at Facebook?
It's a kind of an RPC framework which allows you to communicate between services. Facebook is kind of similar to gRPC, if you heard, or Google Protobufs.
Oh, okay.
In the same area. So basically, it provides an IDL language from which we can generate serialization code and representation of objects in different types. And also, it provides an RPC mechanism to communicate between services.
Okay. And this is one of the projects. Is this one of the projects that's available from Facebook that's open source?
Yes, it has been open sourced twice. Once as Apache Thrift, and then it was unfortunately forked and re-open sourced as FD Thrift, which is now so both are developing independently. So FD Thrift, which I'm working on, kind of, I think it's more actively in development.
Did it originally start as a Facebook project and then go to Apache and then back to Facebook, or?
Right. That was the history.
Okay. That's kind of funny, kind of interesting.
Yeah. Okay, well, Victor, we got a couple news articles to discuss. Feel free to comment on any of these, then we'll start talking more about the format library, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so this first one we have is professional zero-cost setup for C++ projects, and it's part 1 of N. And yeah, I mean, we always talk about zero-cost abstraction with C++, and the author of this blog is trying to apply that principle to setting up your development environment. And it's just the first of, I guess, many posts that he's planning on making, but he's just walking through simple setup using CMake to get started, right?
Yeah, it looks like clean, modern CMake layout, and it looks like might be following that that file layout thing that Vector of Boole proposed.
I do remember that post as well. And
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't remember all this. I know he had like a catchy name for it, but I can't remember what that was now.
Are you familiar with what we're talking about, Victor? Or are we just talking to ourselves here?
Yeah, I think I've seen similar posts recently. And regarding this particular post, one useful thing that I learned from it is that passing cxx to the project command skips ccompiler checks. So I tried it in FMT, and it's saved like 1.5 seconds, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's actually 30% of all configuration time. It's a great tweak, and it's just a one-liner. But I'm not a fan of preventing in-tree builds. It's not in the post, but looking at their GitHub repo, they discourage that. And I think if you are a user of the library, you don't want to work on it, it's easy to just go in the root directory of the project, build it, and install without extra step.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I've always done the CXX on the project setting there, but just because that's what I've seen in other examples.
Yeah, I missed that somehow.
Okay. Next. Go ahead.
Pitchfork, by the way, is the C++ project conventions, and I don't know if it strictly follows that or not, but it looks kind of similar.
Yeah. Okay. Next thing we have, it was only a few weeks ago, I think, that the Visual Studio 2019 release went out, but they're already talking about the first patch. 16.1 Preview 1 is available, and one of the features in that new version will be in-editor documentation for CMake, basically IntelliSense for CMake, which is pretty cool. So if you're using their CMake project support, then you'll get IntelliSense like hints as you're writing out your CMake file.
I kind of hope that this eventually leads to the end of Visual Studio projects.
I mean, they've been working a lot on the CMake support ever since they first introduced it. I'm not sure if that's a long-term goal of theirs or not, but I think they really want to support CMake just as well as they support their own build system.
Yeah, I don't know if they'd ever want to fully deprecate it or not, but if you need to do anything programmatically with Visual Studio projects, it's just a huge pain. Like if you need to change project settings or something or upgrade things, and I've been dealing with some of that even recently.
Yeah, everything's in the IDE.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to do it by command line or something. Okay, next thing is understanding when not to std move in C++. And I thought this was a pretty good article going over some of the situations where you wouldn't want to use a move and the reasons why, what kind of trouble you can get into.
Yes. There's one comment down here at the bottom about this automatic copylation or automatic, what's it called? Compiler. It says, because the GNU C++ compiler implements core issue 1579, the following call to std move is also redundant. And I don't know if 1579, if it's still in the core issues defect reports, does that mean it has not been merged into the standard? Do either of you know?
I don't know.
I have no
Victor?
idea. No, I don't know.
Okay. Well, this proposed resolution that apparently GCC implements is from 2013, and it says the result of an expression of return statement can be with automatic storage duration, blah, 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 can automatically basically move instead of doing a copy out of the value there in that example. And it's just this, I guess it's kind of an esoteric thing for me to have picked up on, but since I'm always thinking about like this kind of thing and how to efficiently write C++, I feel like I need to do some more research on that.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to call out in this article?
Not for me.
Okay. Okay. And then the last thing we have is yet another conference announcement announcing CppP, which is a C++ Paris conference, which is going to be in June. Wow, June 2019. That's coming up really soon. And I think we're actually going to have a couple of the organizers for CPP Paris in a future episode. So we'll be talking more about it then, and as well as other things. But yeah, it's always great to see more new conferences, and they have Kate Gregory for the keynote, which is great.
It looks like they lined up all the speakers and never actually made like a call for papers as far as we were aware anyhow.
Yeah, I guess they must have with having it be in June. It did like a stealth speaker announcement, maybe.
A single day conference in Paris with 3 tracks. It's a very interesting idea.
Yeah. And yeah, awful news out of Paris this week, unfortunately. But it's good to see that they're having their own conference.
Well, I guess for our listeners, that sounded kind of ominous, like there's nothing left of Paris or something. So perhaps for people who weren't paying attention.
Wasn't paying attention, unfortunately, the Cathedral of Notre Dame had a fire and the spire fell. Yeah.
The spire fell, but it looks like the main structure somehow basically miraculously survived a blazing inferno for like 5 hours.
Yeah, and they are planning to rebuild everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Victor, do you want to start off by telling us about why you decided to write your own formatting library?
Sure. So back in 2012, I was writing a parser and needed a way to report diagnostics from it. And I streams were two verbose and mixed parts of the diagnostic message with arguments, which wasn't very convenient. Stdio was unsafe and not extensible. And at the time I learned about Clang's Diagnostics API, which was kind of what I need. You could provide a message and feed arguments through the insertion operator. It had some limitations, and I couldn't also use the whole Clang code base just for this, so I decided to write a simple library with a similar API. I thought it would take a few days, and C++ 11 wasn't widely available back then. So I used the weird trick of having informatic function return a temporary object where you could feed arguments through the insertion operator, and it would do formatting in the destructor. It was horrible. And I eventually replaced it with the variadic function templates, first emulated through variadic macros and then like the real variadics.
Okay, so you started pre-C++ 11 basically, and then upgraded to C++ 11. And now I have to know, like, did you, well, shoot, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but I'm very curious what standard is currently required to use your library?
So currently, the current release requires some elements of C++ 11. So basically variadic templates, some type traits, auto, but not much. So it compiles on GCC 4.4,
wow.
Which is 10 years old. If you use an even older compiler, you can use branch 4, version 4, which is not actively developed, but still maintained. I accept fixes, and someone recently implemented Borland C++ support there.
Okay, so since we got ahead of ourselves, maybe we should go back and you should tell us a little bit more about the library. It's a formatting library
Yes.
that you wanted to use for logging.
Kind of for reporting diagnostics, compiler diagnose error messages and things like that.
Okay. So how does its usage actually look?
Right now?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the main kind of entry point is a format function, which takes a format string and a bunch of arguments that are basically interpolated into the string, where you specify where to put arguments through the curly braces syntax. The syntax is based on Python's str format, if you're familiar with that. It's quite popular. Rust has pretty much the same thing, and it resembles also C Sharp's format feature, although the syntax is a little bit different.
So you worked for Facebook, as we mentioned already, and I believe Folly has its own formatting library, and there's also a Boost formatting library. So what reason did you have to make your own as opposed to just using one of those other options?
Well, I've evaluated all the options and couldn't find one that really fits all my requirements. So the FMT library shares a lot of features with each of the other individual libraries, but what sets it apart is the combination of features. So it's lightweight as StudIO and safe and extensible as IOStreams, and more performant than most other options. In particular, Boost format was very slow. I was thinking about using it, but it was horribly slow.
So does this work at all tie in with the project that you currently work on at Facebook, Thrift?
Not really. It's completely unrelated. It's sort of my hobby project that I started before joining Facebook. I brought it in, but now we're thinking of moving from Folly format to FMT.
Ooh.
So I think it's public knowledge because I recently submitted a patch to Folly, which is on the Git repo, which adds FMT as a dependency.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
That sounds
That's
like pretty
cool.
big news. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're the first people to know that because no one looks at the GitHub commit.
So then you started before you started working on Facebook. How long have you been working on format now?
So I started in 2012, so 7 years.
Okay. And you specifically chose an older compiler support, to support older compilers, that is.
Yeah, so at that time I needed to support older compilers because of some third-party dependencies, but I decided to continue that. People often request this as a feature, maximum portability.
Right.
It's one of the features of the library.
Okay, so there's obviously more we can talk about with FMT, but I'm curious about when you decided to start working on the standards proposal that was based on the FMT library.
So it started around 2016 when people started suggesting that it would be nice to have this sort of functionality in the standard. So I posted on CPP Reddit in August 2016, asking if there is interest for me to prepare such proposal. And the Reddit crowd was very enthusiastic, so I wrote to Howard Hinand for advice, and he encouraged me working on this and provided some useful tips regarding standardization. So 10 days later, I had a first draft of the paper, very kind of raw, but it took the whole year until I got to the first standards committee meeting in Toronto in July 2017.
And what was the feedback that you got in July of 2017?
It was very positive. The paper was kind of not ready for prime time. It was my first paper. Wording was horrible. As it turned out, I didn't even need to have a wording at that time, just a design kind of discussion. But people were very supportive and encouraged me to do some changes and come to the next meeting with the updated paper, which I did. So I attended all but one meeting since then.
Okay. And how has the progress gone since then?
So the paper has been accepted by the Library Evolution group. So the design is accepted, and it passed a few iterations at the library working group, which looks at the wording. So I think wording is right now is in reasonably good shape. So the paper is targeting C++20, but it hasn't been accepted yet.
Right, but because it already went through Library Evolution, it still can be accepted at a future meeting before 20 is final, right?
Yeah, so if it's accepted in Cologne, it will go to C++20.
If you were to take a guess, what chance do you think it has of getting accepted in Cologne?
Oh, I don't know. I don't want to guess. I'm working hard, and library working group was very helpful. They spent like hours of telecon time reviewing the things. So I'm hopeful that it will pass, but we'll see.
Okay. Will you be attending Cologne too then?
Definitely.
Okay.
So with, the standards paper being based on FMT, when, standard library implementers go to bring it, assuming it does make it into C++20, can they just, bring over your code base from FMT, or do they need to go and rewrite it themselves? Like, how close is the FMT library to what's in the proposal?
So the library is pretty close. There was a bi-directional kind of movement of changes between the proposal and the library. So there were some ideas, the standards committee, that were then implemented in FMT. But unfortunately, as I learned recently, the standard library vendors cannot even look at the code, because although it's on this very permissive BSD license. So the reason for that is that BSD license has this clause that the attribution clause, and the common understanding that it applies to binary distribution that they don't want. So I'm currently in the process of relicensing, removing that clause, but I need a kind of approval from all the numerous contributors.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
What license are you aiming for?
BSD without the clause. Optional.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to give attribution.
Is that like BSD 2 clause versus 3 clause version or something like that?
No, it's just one clause.
Oh, the BSD 1 clause.
Well, it's already BSD 2 clause, I think. It will just have another paragraph that relaxes it even further.
Okay.
Yeah.
I must admit I have used both of the BSD license on my own projects, but I don't think I could tell you the difference between the two common ones at the moment.
I have no idea. I've chosen that because it's one of the most liberal. I didn't know that it has some problems with standard library.
Yeah, I never would have thought of that either.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so far you've kind of alluded to some of the things about your library. It's got the Python-like syntax, and you said it's safer than the standard I/O and faster than Folly and some of the other output libraries. Would you want to give some hard numbers on like that? Like, what kind of safety does it bring to us? What kind of speed does it give us? That kind of thing.
So the safety comes from using variety templates. The type information is preserved, so you will, and also it supports parsing format strings at compile time, using constexpr, which Jason, I think you will appreciate.
Yes.
So you can catch all the errors, well, most of the errors at compile time. The API for that, unfortunately, is not pretty right now because of the C++ limitations, but it's possible. Otherwise, if you have, for example, a dynamic string, it will just throw an exception if you have a mismatch between formatting types and what you have in the format string. So it's completely safe. In that respect, also in terms of memory management, it's usually automatic. Although if you want, there is an optional kind of API for where you can provide a buffer and you can misuse that if you really want. As for benchmarks, so it's usually faster than printf, sprintf, so and other options. Other options are slower than sprintf. So I recently benchmarked on tiny format benchmarks and got like 20%, or it was 16%, but since then I implemented other optimizations, 20% faster than sprintf. On some inputs like integer formatting, it's like order of magnitude faster than sprintf.
Yeah, and since I follow you on Twitter, it seems you are often looking for what is the fastest way of formatting a floating point or integer number and following the current advancements in those algorithms. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the only kind of input type, argument type for which FMT was slower until now was floating point. Because it's so difficult to implement. I didn't have time until recently, but the current master branch implements the Grisu algorithm, so which gives this advantage even compared to sprintf.
Wow. So is there any kind of patent issues or anything with those algorithms?
No, I don't think so. It's published in paper and used everywhere. There's a double conversion using Google implementation. I don't think you can. There's a patent for that.
I have no idea, honestly. Just thought I had to ask. Sorry.
I hope.
Right.
I think one of the things you mentioned was extensibility. How is format extensible?
So in terms of extensibility, you can specialize a formatter template for your type, and this is the extension API for adding formatting support for your types. It's kind of similar to the API of stdhash. So you specialize for formatter struct for your type, and then you can inherit it from the simplest thing is to inherit it from one of the standard formatters, for example, formatter of int or formatter of string, and then you only need to provide a single format function that takes an object of your type, and you can either write directly to the output iterator, the string representation, or delegate to the parent's format method.
Okay.
So it is difficult to describe in words, but it's pretty straightforward. It's more complicated if you want to customize parsing, but by the nature of things, because then you need to write the parser for format specifiers, and through the parse function that you put in the same formatter specialization, and you put the parse specifiers in the formatter object for later use in the format function.
Okay, let's try to break this down a little bit. So starting from the first part, if I just have like a pair or some custom struct that's got like an int and a float in it, and I want my own, I want to be able to just send that out to format with no special options, or no custom formatting options. What does that code look like? That's pretty straightforward, it sounds like.
Yeah, so for that you can just create a struct formatter specialization for pair.
Okay.
And then inherit it from, let's say, formatter string.
Okay.
In this specialization, you put a format function that takes a pair and format context.
Okay.
And it can, the easiest way is just to call format2, passing an iterator which you take from the context. So context.out will give you an output iterator where you write. So you put it as the first argument as format2, then you put format string, which can be, let's say, opening parenthesis, curly, comma, curly's, closing parenthesis, which will give you two arguments in parentheses separated by a comma. And then you just pass individual components in the tuple and return the result of format2 from your format function.
Okay, so it sounds like basically I take my pair and I just delegate it to whatever the compiler already knows about for printing out something that is an int and a float or whatever the two types of the pair are.
Exactly. So yeah, and you write it through the output iterator because all the API is iterator based, so you can use it with a variety of types. You can format into a string, into your own buffer, into buffer allocated on stack, for example.
Okay. So if then you were saying it is possible to actually specify your own custom format options. So like right now for an integer, you can say like X or whatever, and it'll make it a hexadecimal, right?
Right.
So I could do something like that for my custom pair printer. I can parse my own custom format string.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's when it starts to get more complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated because then you need to write the actual parser. It's also beneficial to make it const expr, which limits the things that you can use, unfortunately. Although it's getting better, we have more and more stuff available at const expr type. Yeah, but most of the time you'll just, you won't need to write custom format specifiers. And in fact, I recently learned that in Rust, they don't allow that. So you can only use standard format specifiers.
Right, and you mentioned that you use the same syntax as Python's output formatting, and that Rust also uses the same Python syntax?
More or less, they did some tweaks to it. I think when you pass dynamic precision and dynamic width, they changed the syntax. So in Python, you just nest the curly braces, which allow you to refer to other arguments. So in the precision field, you can refer to another argument that will give you runtime precision rather than encoding it in format string itself. So in Python, it's just curly braces. In Rust, I think it's star or something.
Okay. And does the format lib also allow that?
Yeah, it uses curly braces, Python's convention.
Okay, I see.
It kind of restricts it because in Python you can put embedded substrings anywhere, but in FMT it's only allowed for precision or width. Kind of what printf allows you to do.
Okay. Since you just mentioned printf, how difficult of a task is it to migrate from printf to FMT or to the standards, assuming we get it in C++ 20?
It should be possible with Clang code modding tools, refactoring tools, provided that the format string is a literal. It's pretty easy. If it's a dynamic string, it's more tricky. So you will need some kind of runtime translation of format specifiers. Yeah.
Although if you're using printf currently with a dynamic format string, you probably have a security vulnerability in your code.
Exactly. Well, there are good reasons for that. Well, relatively good reasons. For example, if you have a translation database, something.
Right.
Yeah.
So of all the things that we've just discussed, how much of this do you expect to see in C++20? I mean, like, what does the proposal contain?
So the proposal contains the core stuff, the argument handling and the format function, format2 function format function that returns a string, format2 that takes an output iterator and allows you to write to any output iterator, and format2n that takes an output iterator and a size that's similar to SN printf.
Okay.
What else? It specified the extension API, this formatter specializations, and it supports all the fundamental types, formatting of all the fundamental types. And I have a separate paper with Howard Tennant and Daniela Engert, which proposes formatting for chronotypes using the same facility.
Okay, very cool.
Okay. So, I mean, what isn't in there then? What's in the format library that's not in the standards?
Oh, even more. I.O. is not included. Console output with colors and text styles, formatting of tuples or tuples, how you like to pronounce it. Containers, ranges, Unicode support, although it's pretty basic in FMT as well. And compile time format string checks at the top level API. So it's kind of specified that extension API can be supports context per parsing, but it's not hooked anywhere because of the language limitations. So it's kind of designed for the future once we have some kind of ability to provide a convenient format function API where you can process the literal string easily at compile time when other arguments are dynamic. Then we'll hook into this functionality and give you compile time errors. So one of the proposals that allows that is Parametric Expressions by Jason Rice.
For some reason, I thought that had already been accepted because that's also something HANA needs for
compile time regular expressions.
Compile time regular expressions, but I could be mistaken there.
Well, the thing that is accepted is objects as complicated name, like object as non-types and place parameters or something, where you can pass a string as a template parameter. So it gets us halfway there. So you can provide an API, but it will be very ugly. So basically, you'll have to pass a format string in angle brackets.
Right.
It might be okay for regex, but I think for formatting, because it's widely used, it will be a pain. Okay,
I understand. So is there any way to, I mean, you have something that's kind of printf-like. Do you have anything that's like scanf-like?
No, I think in general, output is orders of magnitude more used than input. There is, strangely, in particular, neither Python nor Rust, I think, provide a symmetric API, scanf-like API. But I'm thinking of proposing at least a design paper along these lines, because much of the machinery argument handling can be reused between scanf, scanning and formatting. But I'm not very enthusiastic about it.
I personally think it would be a great idea. You should move forward with it.
Okay.
Between that and CTRE and the other regular expressions, I mean, we could just parse and do anything we wanted to do it in our code after that.
Sure.
So you said you're going to make it to the Cologne ISO C++ meeting. how many ISO meetings have you gone to so far? And have you just been focused on format when you go, or are you know, participating in other discussions as well?
I've been to 5 standards committee meetings so far, mostly dealing with formatting and Unicode. I'm a member of the Unicode standard group and try to attend the meetings, although I haven't been doing that lately because I was too busy. But I plan to resume that. During last meeting, unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to attend much. I was loosely following modules. But other than that, I was hanging out in library working group, hoping for my paper to be reviewed and kind of soaking in all the information and trying to learn how to write standard Ds. Yeah.
And I guess for the sake of letting our listeners know, the Cologne is July 15th through the 20th, I believe.
Probably.
Yeah, 15th to the 20th.
Yeah, 15th, 20th. And then the
So
last meeting of the year is going to be in November in Belfast.
Right. So if you are in Europe, you have great opportunities for the next 2 standards meetings for sure. And actually the one after that's going to be in Prague and then Bulgaria. So yeah, lots of opportunities in the European region.
Yeah. And Cologne is going to be the last meeting when anything can make it into C++ 20, is that right?
Yes. So previous meeting in Kona was the last where you could have design changes, where the design was approved, and this one, next one is the last where you can have wording changes. So that's why I need to be there to have my papers go through.
So you
C++ 20.
Sorry, I didn't to interrupt. You have basically 3 months. People who are listening and they want to help out, is there any way that you need help getting ready for Cologne?
Do you need help with the standard Ds?
If anyone is proficient in standard Ds, I would appreciate if they look at the paper, send me comments. Especially maybe the second paper, the chrono, formatting of chronotypes, because that one hasn't been seen by library yet. This one has been seen multiple times.
Are these on GitHub or something where people can submit issues, pull requests, whatever?
Yeah, it's on GitHub.
Okay, you can send us the links
I don't
and we'll
have
put
a
them in
link.
the show notes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so is there anything else we haven't talked about with format that you would want to bring up before we let you go?
Not really. I think we covered a lot of stuff.
Okay.
All right.
Well, it's been great having you on the show today, Victor.
Thanks. It was great talking to you.
And thanks for joining us.